and we can start recording. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Ron Clough, and I'm with Manufacturing Works, and today we're joined by Scott Holter, who is a consulting services practice leader at Mead & Moore. And this is part of a two-part series. This is the second part. Both of these will be posted up on our YouTube channel if you'd like to look at both of them. Today we're talking about ERP systems. In the first session, we talked about if you already have an ERP system and you're looking at adding some modules, and can you, Mead & Moore has this tool that'll help you ensure that the module that you're thinking of adding will actually solve the problems that you're facing, or at least give you an idea of what percentage of those problems it can solve. In today's session, we're going to talk to those folks that either have an ERP system that for whatever reason they've determined is now a legacy and they need to find an alternative, or for those folks that don't have any ERP. Maybe you're using spreadsheets, maybe you have a disparate number of other products and you're looking to put them all together into one ERP. And what we're going to talk about is the tool necessary here, a tool to help you make the correct decision. And so just a couple of things housekeeping wise, we will be monitoring the chat box. Feel free, this is a session for you, so feel free to jump right in and fire off your questions at any time. If you'd like to, you can even turn on your monitor, turn on your speaker, and you can ask the question directly and have a conversation. Either one. This webinar is for you. I did mention we'll be posting it also. All of our technology events at Manufacturing Works are sponsored by Team Neo and the Smart Manufacturing Cluster of Northeast Ohio, of which we are an active member. And today we have Erica Fitzpatrick, who's with the Smart Manufacturing Cluster. Erica is the program manager for industry and innovation at Team Neo, and we're going to give Erica a couple of minutes to tell us about the Smart Manufacturing Cluster.
Thank you, Ron. So good afternoon. Glad everybody could be here, and we appreciate having Manufacturing Works as a part of our very active part of our Smart Manufacturing Cluster. So just a little bit of background on Team Neo. We're a private nonprofit economic development organization. We aim to accelerate business growth and job creation throughout 18 counties of Northeast Ohio. We're a designated Jobs Ohio Network partner, so we align and amplify local economic development efforts in the region's 18 counties. We conduct research and data analysis to inform local conversations and influence solutions. We market the Northeast Ohio region, and we work to increase access to jobs, education, and training for the region's 4.3 million people. So we do this to build a more vibrant regional economy, one that's more talented, equitable, competitive, innovative, resilient, and prosperous. And then just a little bit of background on our Smart Manufacturing Cluster, which I will also share the link for in the chat. Our cluster accelerates the growth and competitiveness of Northeast Ohio economy through smart manufacturing implementation and innovation that leverages the region's rich manufacturing heritage, unique assets, and talented workforce. We lead the development of innovation roadmaps and serve as a platform for the regional manufacturing blueprint to accelerate adoption and maximize the value of technology. We connect knowledge, experience, tools, and networks with manufacturers to generate demand, increase productivity, spur product innovation, and develop talent and resources necessary to drive technology implementation and innovation. So if you have any questions about the cluster or you're interested in getting involved, please reach out to me. I'll put my contact information and, like I said, the website for our cluster in the chat. So thank you for giving us a few minutes to talk about the cluster, and I'll hand it back over to you, Ron.
All right, thank you, Erica. So let me just spend a minute just to introduce Scott Holter with Mead & Moore. Just a couple of things about him. He is a local to Northeast Ohio, so he grew up in the Brecksville area, and he went off to Cornell and acquired a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. and then went a couple years later off to our own Case Western Weatherhead School of Management for his MBA. Background-wise, work-wise, he's very comfortable talking about this process because he's 25 years. Many of you may know him from this. He was a 25-year APICS instructor. And so maybe you've seen him or maybe you've been a student in one of his classes. Has been a senior manufacturing consultant with Magnet, vice president of operations for a number of companies, including Faro Corporation and Westinghouse. So it comes with a lot of background about ERP systems. And so without any further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to you, Scott.
Oh, thanks, Ron. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, Erica, for the background too. I think we were going to start with Ann posting a couple of polls. So if everyone, we've got a couple of questions lined up. If you folks could maybe answer the questions there that you see.
We've got 8 responses, and you want me to go ahead and end it?
That's good. Yeah, go ahead and end it. And that's good to see, especially that, the 1 year or less. Great that you're doing your homework now and starting to think about it, because it can be an arduous process going through it, because there isn't a bigger expenditure or a riskier one that your business depends on from an IT perspective than an ERP system. So, so I'll hit that. Oh, and then is there another one, Ann? I don't know if I should be clicking.
Nope, I've got to do it. There you go.
Okay. Oh, here you go. And then this is about what modules do you consider most important? Looks like a mixed bag. Scheduling looks in the lead. Inventory and warehouse, yeah, all the supply chain.
We all going to be able to see the results, Scott?
Yeah, not until we.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And while we're talking and while people are answering, there's one of the questions that came up after Tuesday's session that somewhat relates to this is, does this process that we've talked about apply to other softwares? If I have an accounting package, do I need to replace it with a full-blown ERP system? And I noticed that there's 4 votes there for customer relationship management. So I'll field those questions that some had been asked in the chat box Tuesday or after the fact. The process applies to, that we're going to walk through today, tends to apply to ERP just because it's easier to present that. But conceptually, we do this, we've done this for clients for just a maintenance system. We've done it for just CRM. We've done it for just scheduling programs that bolt onto ERP systems. So absolutely, it can be used at any level. It's just less comprehensive than if you go full ERP. So that was a good question. And we will, several people asked about scheduling, so we'll spend some time on that in the body of the discussions today. So good feedback there. Thank you. Quality management is another area like CRM, customer relationship, that some don't feel belongs in the moniker of ERP. And our group, we choose not to really spend too much time arguing about whether it is or it isn't. We'll just talk about the business needs. And if it's solved with a standalone product, great. And if it's solved with a module that's part of an ERP system, that's great too. We just talk with companies about the pros and cons of each approach. So Ann, you could probably end that.
Yeah, I took it down. You still,
Okay.
you're a co-host, so you can X.
Got it. Got it. Thanks. So I thought what we would do is some of the discussions that, or we finished just about 95% of the presentation on Thursday, and it does, or on Tuesday, and it leads into a nice segue. And this will cover some of the, at the end of this as well. But how do you actually make it happen? On Tuesday, we got to a point where we've got a plan to improve our use of software. And these elements were brought up as costs that could be costs in improving your existing systems, but there are also considerations to have if you're buying a new system. So I thought they would allow us to kill two birds with one stone. And today companies are faced with a new model called software as a service that, and when I say new, certainly new within the last 5 to 10 years, where you wouldn't have any infrastructure costs and you might not have any software license costs because you're effectively leasing or renting the software. Whereas in the traditional on-premise or even a hosted model, you have to buy the servers and you pay a lower than the subscription amount for the annual maintenance and support, but you still do pay an annual fee. What we do tend to find is also in the hidden cost area that in the traditional method or mode, the internal staff costs tended to be higher because you were supporting yourself. And so you had to have an IT department or perhaps someone in the financial area often who was tending the server and applying patches and upgrades. And in the software as a service model, if it's included with the service, you'll tend to have lower internal staff costs because all of those upgrades and patches tend to just happen overnight, kind of like the upgrades we get on our phone that we see in the morning, the Google Plus updated overnight. So these are things to keep in mind. And certainly as you're budgeting and looking at either improvements or new systems, the cost model for a software as a service is definitely been a change of expectations to companies.
Quick question, Scott.
Sure.
This is Ron.
Yeah.
Hey, when you talked about the automatic updates,
Yeah.
I mean, that does sound fantastic as long as someone hasn't, well, when you have a software as a service, can you modify it now? Can you have custom software, or is all the custom software separate from the base product?
It's a great question, Ron. And that's certainly one of the things that we like to talk out with clients who are going on a buy cycle. Our general, this is a broad statement, but in general, we have found that the software as a service model, in order to provide that commoditized service, you get a little bit less flexibility and customizability with it. It's certainly a spectrum, so it's not a binary yes or no. But in general, if you're a company where your strategy is to customize your experience with the software, you may have some troubles with some of the more web-based and software as a service models. Absolutely. So
Okay,
if you can fit yourself into their box, then it's the best of both worlds. So good question. So, whether you're improving your upon your existing system or buying a new one, you certainly have to look at all of the infrastructure costs. Maybe you'll have some infrastructure costs, servers. We see that a lot of PCs, tablets, and wireless devices get piggybacked into these type of projects. Even if you're just doing an upgrade or you have licenses and support costs. The big one that I've highlighted here in red is don't ignore the internal resource costs. Our estimate over the course of time is that your people will spend 5 to 10 times the number of hours. Granted, it's part of their salary, wages, and benefits, so it's kind of a hidden cost, but you will spend 5 to 10 times internal hours that you spend for external consultant integrator hours. And so and it's often driven by the software size and scope. That number tends to be for a large full-blown ERP implementation. And then the other thing to consider is the opportunity costs. A big enterprise software initiative will pull people away from other endeavors, whether it's a plant expansion, a warehouse expansion. And we have had plenty of clients sometimes come to us and apologize, say that, hey, we're in the midst of a big deploying new capital, new warehouse, new pieces of equipment, and say, we're going to push off that ERP initiative. And not only do we tell them not to apologize, but we congratulate them for their prudent management. These things take a lot of time, and you don't want to have too many other things going on at the same time. It's like a juggler trying to juggle 5 or 6 balls when they're only competent with 3, they can all come crashing down. So one of the questions we get frequently is, should we go all in or should we phase in our software? I apologize for giving you the consulting answer, which is it depends, but it really depends on your needs relative to the time to benefit and the time required. The all-in approach, meaning, whether it's ERP or just an upgrade, but a lot of new modules, reduces the amount of time, but it concentrates the effort. If your team can take that on, that is our preferred approach and recommended approach. But we do recognize that a phased approach minimizes the disruption to the business. And heavens knows, these days, we all have a lot of disruptions to our businesses. So a phased approach may not be the worst strategy if you have to, if you only have a certain amount of time that you can put into it. A couple of caveats: we always suggest discussing your preferred approach with your vendor's preferred approach and make sure that you agree on it, and then confirm your direction with other companies. That have they had success, and do they have any regrets with the all-in kind of cold turkey approach versus phasing things in, say by department or by module, however you want to do that. With respect to internal resource considerations, the do-it-yourself approach works pretty well if you've got a lot of honor students in the classroom who have done it before and have a lot of experience. Most often what we see is that middle approach where there's a combination with some amount of resources, typically a significant investment in third-party consulting resources, typically from the software vendor, maybe with an independent firm to help guide. We've heard this approach having ERP done to you as opposed to done for you. We don't see this, I think, hardly at all in the small and mid-market. It tends to be, more of the larger type of clientele, but we've not seen it all too successful because it doesn't tend to breed adoption of the software, which is what a lot of Tuesdays was about. Without getting too much into it, certainly you want to have an implementation timeline that includes a budgetary spend plan so that you know what the cash flow is going to be. And then our view of change management process for deploying, again, even if you're just implementing the scheduling module for the first time in an upgrade or an improvement exercise, is to develop their project plan, like we just talked about, educate the team on how the software works generically, give them everything, that's more the classroom education. Then that enables them to simulate how the business might work in the software. And we use a circle here to just show that do this circularly, walk through scenarios several times. And the outputs of that should be, to Ron's point earlier, any modifications, any data that might need to be converted, almost invariably custom or special reports, inquiries. These are things that, because even if the software works, the software is deployed in other companies, every company likes to look at the outputs differently. And also, and what I think is most important is your operating procedures. Somehow building job aids, or if you can build them into your ISO procedures, that will ensure adoption of how you want people to use the software. Once those are all done, you can then go into a dress rehearsal, or what we commonly call a conference room pilot, where you test it. And that's often done once or twice, but this is to verify that everything works as designed. Then and only then do we recommend going to the masses and training them on how it's going to work after you've proven it out in kind of a laboratory setting. And then after the training has been done, there's typically a cutover phase where you're populating the database, bringing some data in or setting some of it up in preparation for go live, which is often done over a weekend or on a Monday. And the point of this is this model for change management can apply to new implementations as well as any sort of improvement initiative or an upgrade. one of
Got
the
it.
last point, oh, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I just had a quick question that's relevant to that last slide. And, you know, back in the day, or maybe a lot of people have it today, when you have your on-site version, you could always set up a test company, and, you know, you'd have two companies, test company and live, and you can always copy the data from live, move it into test, and then put on a new module.
Yeah.
Is that available? Do they still do that? Is that available in the software as a service?
It's commonly available, but I would certainly advise everybody to make sure that that comes with your purchase. We have found a few that's an extra charge that, you know, they hit you like when you're talking to the finance director at the car dealer. And, oh, you wanted the test database. Well, now you've got to pay a little extra for your subscription. So that's one of those good, I'm glad you asked, Ron. It's a good beware question. Don't assume that it's included.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So just, you know, to conclude from Tuesday's presentation, you know, we're big proponents of measuring your software's fit and utilization like a machine. Update those needs because they change due to business changes and customer demands annually, and monitor your utilization, just like you monitor the adherence to your quality system procedures, just like you audit your financial statements, audit the use of your enterprise software, and use your work procedures and process maps to help institutionalize the use of your systems, whether it's ERP, CRM, accounting, scheduling, whatever those are. Be cognizant of the impact of external changes on your software. Customers have this nasty habit of asking for everything, right? And we love our customers, but it's nothing for a buyer or someone at your customer to ask for special packing slips, special labeling, whatever. That adds cost to the maintenance of your system. And then the last point of it, always, you know, when you go into it, invest as much in education and training on the software as the software itself. And if you set that marker kind of a 1-to-1 ratio for your budget, you will not walk away with what is called shelfware, where the software is perfectly fine, but no one knows how to use it. So that's the cleanup from Tuesday, but it really also fits at the end of today's, because it's about the implementation and adoption. And today's discussion is more focused on selection. So unless there's any questions related to what we just wrapped up, I can move on with the courtship of new vendors. Yeah. So I was mentioning at the beginning of this, I just 2 weeks ago gave the father's toast because the first of my 4 daughters got married, and I thought it was funny that I was going to be giving a presentation that I knew talked about marriage, and we jokingly call our service a technology dating service, but we do when we help align a client with a software system or a technology platform, we do view it as arranging a marriage, not just a date, because you will end up with a long-term partnership that hopefully is mutually beneficial. The switching or divorce costs are very high. And as you might imagine, there are many changes. And an ERP or CRM, these are among the largest, riskiest IT investments that a company could take on. One of the, I think, often unsaid statements is that to go about it well, implicit in is that we want to avoid customization costs. Now, that doesn't mean that customization in and of itself is a bad thing, but if you're customizing software to do commodity-like features, you probably have the wrong software. So we do want to avoid customizations so that if you buy software that you have to customize to do basic things, you probably bought the wrong software. But customization to build in your special sauce, how you do things, those things that are unique to your company, that are strategic competitive advantages, that's not a bad way to use customization. So we want to be careful to differentiate between good and bad customizations. Going through a software selection process should be an educational process for your employees and will help with gaining buy-in and unanimity, and it should prepare them for implementation. So several of you mentioned that you're looking at potentially a new software system in the next year or couple of years. And these are some of the reasons or drivers that we've seen. Growth and expansion, maybe a spinoff. You are a spinoff of a larger entity. perhaps being version locked. You've customized so heavily that you can't upgrade, and or at least not simply. Or perhaps the software is no longer supported, no longer viable. Maybe the vendor has been acquired and is no longer a going concern. Or what we do see from time to time is the software was fine for the way the business used to operate, but we've added new products, new processes, new services, and it's no longer a good fit. So what I thought I would do is, our statement here is know what you're buying. And we get there, I'm going to escape this now and go into this. But these are a series of reports that kind of Ron and I talked and said, maybe we'll begin with the end in mind. But this is a series of reports. This is from an actual live client. I've hidden their name to just say they're a small RV part supplier. And we did a big lengthy requirements definition. And I'm going to show you just a series of reports. This is the least detailed, but it showed that if we included what we consider to be tier 2 and tier 3 products, that's based generally on cost and complexity. These were the 10 that had the highest overall score coming out of our research database. And then if we drill down a layer deeper, what we found was that in some cases, like if you look at marketing and Salesforce management, known as CRM, we found that this My Solutions TrackPro, a small vendor out of California, got an entire 0% fit for that, for the CRM module. But because we had only weighted 2% of our decision criteria on it, the client was still okay with considering it, saying that maybe we could look at a bolt-on like Salesforce or whatever, or even a standalone CRM system. But when we got over to say something like Sage's X3, which only had a 55% fit in quoting and estimate, sales order and quoting, we knew that there was a big problem. And when we drilled down a bit further, we saw that for this client in the area of estimate processing, they had all zeros, as in another competitor that was on the list that still had a 90+% fit overall, was only a 50% fit in estimating. And since this client has a job shop component to them, that just looking at those scores there without digging into the details was enough for us to eliminate those two candidates. Further, when we went forward, we took a look at show me all of the highest, or what we called strategically weighted criteria. Were there any knockouts? And we noticed one of them was, can the CRM system run on a smartphone? And that was, and again, this is one client of many, but we noticed that several of those weren't supported or required a bolt-on in order to do that. So the point of this is we've collected all of this research over the course of 15 years. We meet with these vendors once or twice a year, and we're able to report back to our clients without having to solicit answers from their software salespeople as to what the packages can and can't do. And then what that enables us to help our clients do is get down to a short list very quickly and confidently, knowing that they're not going to waste time sitting in demos only to be disillusioned because the package can't do something they really want. To show you that this is a larger global biomedical company headquartered here in the Cleveland area that we worked with. And you'll notice, because they're much more in process manufacturing, mixing up chemicals, doing additives, they're actually on the front line of the COVID fight. We got a whole cast of different packages that bubbled to the top with the high percent fit. A couple repeats, some of the larger ones, but their needs were very different. They had global needs, and we did go through the same reports with them, fit at the area level, looking at their fit from an IT perspective, the fit from a supply chain perspective. And if you notice, there's not a very colorful chart, which indicates there was a lot of good candidates. Ultimately, we did get down to looking at things like, looking at this one here. And I did recall that this company does a lot of what are called blanket sales orders, annual contracts with its customers. and one of the vendors, NetSuite, doesn't support that. And so that was a knockout criteria in this particular case for that vendor. Again, we didn't have to interview Oracle or the salespeople for NetSuite to get that. It just became very clear that before we even got into entertaining vendors, NetSuite was not going to be a candidate for this client. And so that's, and after we go through those that are of a strategic weight, then we'll tend to boil down and look at the strategics and those that are medium or required. And then maybe the last cut will include some of the nice to haves. But generally speaking, we're able to use these reports to get a client to a short list of 2 to 5 candidates without even meeting with any of the software companies and dealing with their nonstop phone calls. So I just wanted to show you that some of the output that we deliver is part of this tool and framework. Ron, any questions to go from that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just a quick summary for those folks that maybe were on the first session, but maybe missed it. But at the top end of this, to start using the tool, I think you had told me one time there's upwards of 2,500 different questions, and
Yep.
all of them, if you were interested in everything, that you kind of walk the people through. And this is on the online tool, so they can
Yes.
kind of walk themselves through it, their team. And then, of course, that number is much smaller if you're only looking at certain strategic objectives. But I did want to say that just for everyone's sake, this tool is something for those of us that have been in this situation where you have to write an RFQ and you need to define what it is you need. I just think that alone, which, if you try to do it yourself, can take an immense amount of time. And it just helps you get to that stage, let alone that there's somewhere just shy of 100 different packages that as you answer the questions are being assessed. So it's a risk mitigator, I guess, for most of the folks that are on this call is what it is.
It is. Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Ron. And so, just a couple of quick slides, and then we'll open up and we'll go into the tool and show a little bit more how we got to those reports. But one of the things I like to set out here is we really like an improvement exercise when you're especially when you're going through a new software purchase. It's very important to start off with kind of a project charter. What are our goals and objectives? What are we trying to accomplish? When it's a new software package purchase, we always ask the client the question of why would you spend $100,000, $500,000, whatever the number is, on a new ERP system when you've got other competing priorities for that. And then as part of that, then what is the strategy and the scope? And I'm going to talk through these with you. It's not complicated. It's typically getting all those things decided on as maybe a 3 to 5 hour session. So it's not a big where you're going to get a 3-inch binder of an IT strategy, but it's really important to answer those big picture questions early. There's no right or wrong answers, but what it will help you do is not spend time evaluating software that violates your strategies. For example, if one of the strategies, and we hear this commonly, oh, we've heard about all the horror stories from SAP, don't put us into SAP. Or if you want a domestic software vendor, if that's part of the strategy, that's good to know early. So, and there's a question here. It says, do you guys work with the selection for smaller module package, e.g. CRM, QMS? Yes, we do. And as a matter of fact, we're just starting up a project right now for someone who has an ERP system that they want to keep, but they want to add on a demand planning and forecasting system to it. And so our framework fits well with that as well. And and as we go through this, I'll show you how we do that. So where the nitty gritty really begins is, and I'm not in presentation mode, is the business process and software requirements definition. And so we think that you want to get into a requirements profile, whether you're doing an upgrade, an extension, a replacement, or an periodic, annual, semi-annual fit and audit. And the purposes of these requirements, especially when you're talking about a new purchase or a replacement, are to provide you points to differentiate among the competing vendors if you're replacing. And In addition, you certainly want to know what all the basic sort of meat and potatoes things are. What are the features that you have today that you can't do without, but also to really highlight those points of differentiation. And the requirements building process that I'm going to walk you through here, certainly you want to take a look at what are you doing in your current systems. And that's it. That's usually the lion's share, and maybe it's the trivial many. But where we often spend a lot of time with our clients is looking at what about those custom software and those custom reports? What are people still doing in Excel databases and Access databases and spreadsheets that the software wasn't able to support, so you had to go outside the system for? We'll also look for things like manual logbooks at the receiving dock or the shipping dock to see if people are grabbing data that they don't have otherwise. And you certainly want to include all of the basics. We would all be hard pressed from QuickBooks to SAP to not find a system, or they can all do things like invoicing and pay vendors, but you really do want to focus on what's unique, and it tends to not be in the financial accounting, but you will find some unique things in cost accounting, plus all of the areas of sales and operations. And then the last question before we get into the demo, and I get this question all the time, and I thought I'd throw it out to you, is should we do our process maps while we're doing our requirements gathering or afterwards? And typical consultant speak, the answer is it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. Software requirements define the what. Oops. What do we want? Do we want the system to do purchase requisitions? Do we need an approval cycle in purchase requisitions? Should a buyer be able to combine multiple requisitions into one purchase order? Process maps go beyond just the what and define how, who, and when those activities will occur. So we believe that the ideal state is to develop your as is and your desired future state pre-selection. And I specifically use the word ideal there because in an ideal case, if you've got future state process maps, it's very easy to distill the requirements from them. However, we aren't always presented with ideal conditions. It's very common for us to work with clients that have to rush through the requirements gathering and the software purchase because they just acquired a new company or their software vendor went out of business or whatever. So we are often put into cases where we need to be more practical. And in those cases, we will use the requirements to define what the what's, and then pick the software based on those, and then do the process maps as part of the implementation. It's a little bit riskier, but it does cut the time to the new purchase. And so this is just a couple of examples of some of the process maps that we've developed. This one single threaded, this one being the more multi-channel, or is known as a swim lane diagram. So very common for us to do those pre-selection if we can, if the time is afforded, but more commonly during the implementation process. So I'm going to end the show here. And is there any questions in the chat box? I don't see any at the moment. But this is our framework. We call it the ERP Navigator. I'm going to log in. And Ron had mentioned that I'm going to switch companies to that RV part supplier. There we are. And Ron had mentioned that we had seeded our framework with about 2,500 questions to a client, to a buyer of software. They're a question of need. So for example, if we go into production scheduling, which several of you had asked about, or several had mentioned that was, so just under scheduling algorithms, we've identified 19 algorithms or calculations as starter kit questions for you to consider. So if you're an Apex guy like me, these terms might be familiar. Backward infinite scheduling. So to a client, how important is that? Is that strategically important? Kind of medium required, medium important, a nice to have, or not required at all? And in this particular case, we said that it was required, and we want to see that in the first demo. Similarly, we ask about forward infinite scheduling. And then we get into, do we want our infinite scheduling routines to consider queue, post-run wait time, like if paint has to cure or dry, or if something that's hot has to cool down before it can be moved on, or post-run move times, like it's moving out to moving to another building. We get into then finite scheduling. Can I do forward and finite simultaneously? Can we finitely schedule machines but infinitely schedule the labor, or the reverse? Can our scheduling routines include non-perishable tooling such as gauges, fixtures, molds, dies? Sometimes the machine is available, but the darn die isn't available. And in some environments, that's just as important. And then I think we get into midpoint or theory of constraint scheduling, and then whether you need overlapping or concurrent scheduling algorithms. Do you need to schedule outside operations? Do we want to inject priority codes? Critical ratio, which is a technique from Apex, and then attribute or group code scheduling, which is typically used to reduce the setup times by grouping like work together when we sequence or scheduling it. So just in the area of production scheduling algorithms, we're dealing with almost 20 different questions to you. Are those important or relevant at all? If I switch to a software vendor, and I don't know if anybody is, but one that came up here recently among one of our clients is Eci Software's M1. And so we have Eci Software as a vendor. We have 5 of their packages in here. They've gone in an acquisition binge. They acquired Job Boss and what they're now calling Job Boss Squared, which really irritates me because Squared is a hard thing to make appear, Macola and Max. But if somebody wanted to know, does M1, the latest version, and we've got multiple versions in there, support forward infinite scheduling? Sure enough, it does. And my consultants and I have verified that in an audit of their software. So that's how we use this framework to match up our clients' needs with what the various software packages can and can't do. So I'll go back to the client though. And so that's for them, we would have gone, you can see this tree structure here. These questions or attributes are grouped into subtopics, topics into subtopics into topics, topics into area. Ron, question?
Yeah, I do. And sometimes it's hard to admit what you don't know, but there are a lot of topics that you brought up that I can't say that I would be able to sit here and write the definitions to them. So as part of the process, is there someone who's going to help me and my team if we were to engage? They're going to explain to me and maybe look at our shop and say whether or not these are, from your experience, these are appropriate or something. Okay.
Absolutely. We do. We actually offer this both ways. We have had some clients that tell us, hey, this isn't our first rodeo. We're on our 3rd ERP system. Could we go in and you guys just come in and guide us and kind of audit our answers? But at least 3/4 of our clients ask us, say, geez, we don't really know what those things mean or what the application is. And that's where we come in with our knowledge. And, while I'm an Apex guy with an industrial engineering background, they tend not to let me get into the general ledger. I know a little bit about it to be dangerous, but, you might imagine we've got plenty of accountants who can help you with things like, advanced inventory, GL integration, and whether we want the purchase price variance sub account to be debited by inventory class. There's people smarter than me who know whether that's appropriate. So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So and to that point, the question set that we build was cross-functionally developed. We put accountants on the accounting section. We put our CQE in the quality section. We put our Apex guys on the supply chain and manufacturing questions, and some of our technology guys on the system-wide features and the technology platforms. So go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, Scott, just a quick follow-up just about production scheduling. And it's probably true for other modules, but so of those 93 packages, can you, let's say that production scheduling is my #1 problem. And is it possible to just solve that problem with these packages, or is that, maybe there's scheduling specific packages, but yeah.
Yeah, good question. And so, one of the things, and I showed that on Tuesday, the client Catalyst, they were very interested, or several in their team thought that they should throw out their ERP system. They didn't think it was any good. And what we showed them was that it's over a 90% fit, and that most of the capabilities we felt, and once we explained the concepts to them, they kind of understood it better, and they are willing to give it the old college try to re-adopt their current system. Now, in that particular case, there are some areas such in the barcoding that they are going to need supplemented with a third-party solution. So the direct answer to your question is yes. We just wait until we understand what the needs are and then prescribe the right solution, whether it's from the vendor or not. There's a local company that we've worked with several times that we together found that their ERP vendor was generally a good fit for them. But what they were trying to do in the maintenance area, especially with their IoT initiatives, their ERP vendor's maintenance module was relatively weak. And so they did, and we walked them through finding a best of breed standalone maintenance management system. So sometimes we end up defaulting back to the ERP vendor's module, and sometimes we do go off the board and bring in a best in class standalone solution.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's a question here. So 10-minute warning. So yeah, we've been going through that. So I will go back to the presentation. And, in terms of identifying candidates, this is where we got the idea 15 years ago, in that we were sending out RFPs, like Ron said, independently one-off for our clients, and decided to just consolidate all of that data into a database. And we realized we had some data of value. And that's when we started keeping it initially in an Access database. Now you see it's in SQL with a web front end. We can move on to that. I talked about the costs and the total ownership costs. And, in terms of gathering ERP costs, we have done a job of tiering the vendors based on their complexity and their cost, but we do believe that you want to send out RFPs to get formal proposals. Again, our definition of an RFP is not telling us what you can and can't do. We've captured that research for our clients, but you still, from a cost standpoint, you have to force those vendors into comparable scopes. Generally, we see the cost similar within a market tier, but it's not always the case depending on what you're specifically looking for. We have found a couple of things that actually increase your purchase costs. If you end up having the vendors come back for more than 2 demonstrations, it's going to be hard for you to negotiate a discount because their marginal costs and their sales are going to be eaten up in their travel costs and whatnot. And we've also found, because back to the point that this is a marriage, antagonistic interactions and negotiations with your spouse will tend to not get you a lot of cost reductions, and they may increase your purchase costs. Timing can save a few percent. We're here at the end of a quarter, and this is a great time these companies tend to be quarterly driven. We have found that you can save 3 to 5% by timing the purchase at the end of a fiscal quarter. We've also found that the niche leaders, if they're a vendor that's in a particular niche, or if they have brand name recognition like a Microsoft or an SAP, they do tend to have pricing power and will dig in a little firmer on price. But so what we have found, summarizing, is that the costs are useful when picking your semifinalists, but not so much the winner. So how do you investigate candidates? We're big fans. It never hurts to do an overview demo yourselves. You don't need a consultant to do that. It'll help you determine what modules they have and their user interface. We like to help our clients orchestrate high jump demonstrations, meaning what are those high degree of difficulty things that we can weed out the pretenders on? And then the day in the life is to validate the detailed fit in the flow and integration. We often have our clients go through a separate technology review with mainly just the IT staff or those that are technologically inclined to get the buy-in and validation on the platform. And then, although the software community doesn't really like to do this, we have worked a couple of scenarios with clients where we did a paid for proof of concept 3 to 5 day workshop. And these were in cases where there was so much complexity, it almost warranted, we were down to kind of one vendor, but rather than writing a big check, we wanted a proof of concept, kind of a conceptual design to validate. And the clients did pay for it as a consulting exercise with us and the software vendor. But again, back to Ron's point about risk mitigation, anything you can do to validate your decision ahead of time is better. Certainly expert opinions from outsiders. We do this periodically just to help someone validate a decision. So, and we're also big fans of conducting your due diligence. Visit the other companies and learn their experiences. Visit the software vendor or the value-added reseller. Go to their headquarters, meet the support team that you're going to be interacting with on an ongoing basis. And certainly interview the consultants ahead of time that come in to lead your project and make sure that you align with their personalities and their approach and those kind of things. So that's, I mean, that's really the content. The rest of it is about what we talked about at the end of Tuesdays that I led with this morning. So I'm going to end this. And Ron, you had mentioned some other areas that people had some interest in. And I thought in the remaining couple of minutes here, I could, come back in and just, if there was any areas of particular interest. I recall you saying supply chain.
That was big. Even in the survey, I think that inventory and warehouse management was high up there.
Yeah.
And sales order processing management. If you could just spend, I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but
one of the areas that we added to our content, and that's why we're always evolving our content, was this international purchasing area, because so many of our clients are importing containers and wanting to track and manage the containers that are coming from abroad. And this led us into a whole set of attributes that if it doesn't apply to you, we would just take it out of scope. If, for example, if this client didn't have that in scope, we would just come into here and say supply chain, purchasing, and click the hide button to take international purchasing out of scope. But in their case, since it is in scope and they do a lot of importing from China, we wanted to discuss with them about dealing with, purchase orders and linking purchase orders to a shipping container, things like that. The other area that we dealt with from a supply chain perspective was getting and soliciting requests for quotes from your suppliers, material suppliers, and having an RFQ module inside, not just for purchase orders or purchase recs, but actually purchase RFQs. And lastly, and while it was out of scope for this client, an area that we felt has garnered so much interest lately is a supplier portal, where you interact via e-commerce, but not with your customers, but with your suppliers, and have your suppliers come to your portal to bid on things, et cetera. So that's been a huge area of interest in the last 3 to 5 years. Ron?
Just to jump over, because you mentioned the portal on this sales order management, I would think, what about a portal for customers?
Absolutely. Yep. You can see that's one of the key things here that we cover. And so, for example, with this client, they did want a customer portal. And so we would have talked to them about things like, can our customers, their customers check inventory? Can they place a request for quote? Can customers of this client of ours place a request for quote? Can they enter an order? Can we post a quote that a customer could come and get? Can we send an acknowledgement through the portal? So streamlining that whole interaction, again, if it applies to you, we've got a whole level of inquiry to discuss what is potential. And that's part of our job, is to illuminate what's possible to companies. And many times they'll throw tomatoes at us and say, that doesn't apply to us. But it's part of just getting the exposure of what might be.
Okay. Very good. And, you know, just to respect everyone's time, we are right up on the hour, but I think most importantly, and thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Erica. Thank you for all the people that participated today. You know, the main takeaway is that it's a huge decision to make. And what we just wanted to do in our community is make sure you knew that there is someone here with Meet and More that can help you take something that's very complicated and help you break it down into those things that are most important to your organization. And so we hope that you benefited from that. Obviously, feel free to reach out to Scott directly. And Scott, I don't know if you have your email address up there, but we should put it into the chat box real quick.
Oh, yeah, let me do that.
And just before everyone signs off, so we can have it as part of the recording, so people can contact you directly. But thank you all very much. I'll give you a minute, Scott, to put that in.
Very good.
And
Thanks everyone for attending and the questions. And if there's any follow-up, I know Ron had a lengthy list of questions and areas that they thought might be of interest. We didn't get to all of them, but I'd be happy to field those on the side.
Great. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Ron.
And again, thanks everyone.
Erica. Ann.